2 weeks in, and the Bengals' year already may be over. For most franchises, disaster takes time. In Cincinnati, though, it always shows up early and rarely leaves. Injuries, collapses, just enough hope to break your heart. But this year was supposed to be different. Everyone got paid, they finally had a defense, and they weren't going to stumble out of the gate. This time, though, it was just their quarterback, Joe Burrow, who stumbled straight into a turf toe injury that's going to keep him out for most of the regular season action. And now, with their Super Bowl window and franchise quarterback's future in jeopardy, it's time we actually confronted the scary truth about Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. KRICH crew, how we doing? We suiting up in our Bengals hat we got on today, and truthfully, kind of feels like if I put this on, I might get injured. Yeah, and especially with like Joe Burrow catching injuries in 4 out of his 6 seasons in the NFL or something crazy like that. Like, if you wear this hat, you need to actually be scared about your health just in general, because you don't know if you're going to catch an injury where you're walking or whatever. But that's all besides the point. As always, if you are new here, make sure you comment. I will make sure to recognize you in the comment section with a heart or responding to your comment. Appreciate all the love you guys have been showing. And again, we are live streaming this Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure to hit the noti bell on that once it is live over there. I will see you guys over there. I'll let you know when we are live. We're doing a giveaway as well. And I cannot wait to just give back to you guys and show all the love for 50K. But with all of that out of the way, KRICH crew, let's hop into today's video and talk about just the scary truth about Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals and what they face for the rest of this season. Really, when we thought that history wasn't going to repeat itself, the Bengals were cruelly reminded of what actually was going to happen, or what their season should actually look like in week 2. Since 2020, the year they drafted Joe Burrow, Cincinnati was 1-9 in their first 2 games of the season. They managed to bounce back in 2021 and make the Super Bowl, as well as a deep postseason run in 2022. However, in 2023 and 2024, these slow starts proved costly as they fell short of the playoffs on both occasions. Amazingly, the tides had shifted in 2025 as the starters were playing in the preseason, so they showed up in week 1 with less rust, and what do you know? They finally started 2-0. And don't get me wrong, because the wins, they were far from pretty, but that was far from the big concern that Zach Taylor had.
We didn't win any of these games last year, and so usually when you can win a game like this, that's a recipe for success, and it means you're going to be a good team if you can find a lot of different ways to win, and we did today.
Once again, this season, the Bengals were billed as a Super Bowl contender if they could just start faster. But in both weeks 1 and 2, with and without Joe Burrow, the early warning signs were impossible to ignore. In week 1, Burrow faced pressure on 41.4% of his dropbacks per PFF, despite Cleveland sending 4 few rushers 82.8% of the time. The O-line play has long been a concern, and unfortunately, this unblocked hit that Myles Garrett laid on Joe Burrow in week 1 was something of a precursor for what was to come. And now look, obviously the toe injury that Joe Burrow has sustained is just devastating for this Bengals franchise. But even when he was on the field, things weren't exactly clicking with that offensive line. Against Cleveland, Burrow passed for over 100 yards with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins combining for 5 receptions. Yes, that's right. The wide receiver duo that Mike Brown dropped $250 million on fell completely flat in the season opener. And yes, although in week 2 it was better in the passing game, the Bengals defense let Jacksonville absolutely run a riot in their home opener. Even with Brian Thomas Jr. and Trevor Lawrence gifting them plenty of turnovers, Cincinnati still allowed 27 points. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the Bengals were going to be a defensive juggernaut, because we kind of know that this is how their defense has always operated, by giving up a decent amount of points. But after the overhaul that they had this past offseason, it's not what you want to see from this defense. They brought in defensive coordinator Al Golden, fresh off of a national championship run with Notre Dame. He's a renowned developer of talent and was given an elite edge rushing prospect in Shamar Stewart to get the most out of. Golden's unit has taken a minute to get going, not helped out by the fact that Stewart did hold out until July 26 due to a contract dispute with this organization. But now with him also limping off against the Jags, things could only get even worse. The front office was able to get plenty of other business done in the meantime, re-signing Joseph Ossie, Cam Sample, and BJ Hill, while adding TJ Sladen to the front as well. The biggest name to re-enter the fray though was Trey Hendrickson, who wasn't granted the long-term deal he was hoping for, instead receiving a hefty $14 million raise for the year just weeks before the season kicked off. And coming into this season too, there was no denying it. This was the year that Cincinnati was going all in, and it had to be their year. Like, for all of that investment, Cincy had a defense that allowed Jacksonville to pull ahead and stay in the driver's seat of their Week 2 contest until just 18 seconds were left on the clock. And yes, while they did come up big in the fourth quarter, it was only when they absolutely had to. And truthfully, I don't really understand why this defense couldn't have at least picked it up and played a little bit better when Joe Burrow was actually in the game and, keeping it a much closer game and just playing a lot better. But undoubtedly, the biggest point or biggest thing that we have to talk about from this game is Joe Burrow obviously going down with the turf toe injury. Those worries about Burrow's protection reared their ugly head as the pocket collapsed around the quarterback one too many times in the first half, and as he tried to extend the play, he was swallowed up by an underrated Jags defense, picking up a turf toe injury in the process. And now, as we all know, Joe Burrow is ruled out for a majority of the season, I think about 3 to 4 months, and we got to see his replacement in Jake Browning, and to say the least, it was not that impressive to say the least, because Jake Browning isn't Joe Burrow. I think we all know that. And yes, to an extent, Cincy knew what they were in for. Browning started 7 games in Burrow's stead back in 2023, going 4-3 in the process, as the former Husky finished with just under 2,000 passing yards, a 12-7 touchdown interception ratio, and a serviceable 98.4 passer rating. And don't get me wrong, he was definitely passable, but it was a dramatic drop-off from the showing that we always see Burrow in this Bengals offense always put out week in and week out. And even when Browning did step onto the field at Paycor Stadium and threw for 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, Bengal fans weren't too surprised by the roller coaster ride their number 6 took them on. He iced the game with a last gasp tush push at the end of a long drive, and spirits were high despite the circumstances. Don't get me wrong, Jake Browning can sling it, and he has one of the best groups in the entire NFL to aim at. And sure, yes, of course, this team is very impressive in the Bengals. But this wasn't the end of the world for Bengals fans, right?
The Bengals are 2-0, and I have no problem saying I really feel like they were outplayed in both of their games this year. The Browns were the better team. The Jaguars messed it up royally yesterday as well. Should have been up in the game more, made some mistakes late in the football game. Bengals, kind of a work in progress. Still, give Zach Taylor, the Bengals, a lot of credit for being 2-0, gutting out wins, and making some plays when they have to.
Like 2-0 for the first time since 2018 feels good for this staff at the moment. Plus, they face another team who is down to their second string quarterback in week 3 in the Minnesota Vikings. What's even more helpful too is Browning does have some added incentive to perform, given that the Vikings waived him back in 2021. He then led Cincy to a dramatic overtime win against Minnesota in 2023 with over 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, so it's safe to say that Browning will try to seize the moment. So who knows, perhaps maybe Cincinnati's season isn't completely lost despite losing Joe Burrow. But that's also the thing that we need to discuss about this Bengals team, is that there's an emerging trend that is not a good trend that we're seeing right now, and it's that Joe Burrow is not being protected adequately to be successful or to even survive on this team and play long into his hopefully long NFL career. And look, this is nothing new to Bengals fans either. They saw the front office fail to build around Andy Dalton and AJ Green to get beyond the first round of the playoffs. Joe Burrow's present dilemma, though, is one familiar to every football fan. It invokes one of the craziest what-ifs of the 21st century, and I'm going to let Dan Orlovsky elaborate on it.
This season is over for the Bengals. I would say this iteration of the Bengals needs to be over as well because of this. He is trending, and I hate saying it, toward being this version or this generation's Andrew Luck. The amount of times that they've been hit in their first 5 seasons, the amount of contact that they've had, the amount of pressure that they've dealt with, the amount of sacks that they dealt with. And Andrew talked about retiring in part because of all that wear and tear buildup.
And yes, I know that might sound a little bit dramatic, but it's something that does have to be asked. And yes, I know you're going to jump in the comment section, but before you do, I know the Bengals are a much more they're a better team and a much more well-developed team than Andrew Luck ever had on the Colts. But here's Dan Orlovsky again, this time immediately after Super Bowl 56, where Burrow was sacked 7 times and yet still kept the Bengals within a field goal of going into overtime.
This is what I would say coming out of the game if I was Cincinnati and Joe Burrow. I was incredibly impressed with him again yesterday. he right now is on the Andrew Luck track. And
Absolutely.
That cautions me,
Yeah.
candidly. I mean, you watch this kid get beat up game after game after game after game. That will not last in this league. And he is a phenomenal. They should win multiple Super Bowls with that kid, okay? The Bengals should win multiple Super Bowls with Joe Burrow. If they don't get it fixed this offseason, he's on the track to become the next Andrew Luck.
Like, even back in early 2022, it's very easy to see that Burrow needed a better support system around him to survive in the NFL. Like, he got this team to a Super Bowl while being the most sacked quarterback of the year. Burrow still led the league in completion percentage and won his first Comeback Player of the Year award. And on one hand, the fact that Burrow has won the award twice is a testament to his resilience. The comparison to Luck is apparent and telling, but only as a cautionary tale, but also in providing a target for the blame. Like, what's unfolding in Cincinnati is less about bad luck and more about bad leadership. This is a franchise comfortable riding the coattails of a first overall pick, willing to mortgage long-term sustainability for fleeting flashes of relevance. And look, there's no two ways about it either. He's been worn down to the bone in just 5 years as an NFL starter. The graphic that Orlovsky flashed up is alarming too. Joe Burrow has been mauled since he took his first NFL snap. And honestly, when you see that Joe Burrow's contact and pressure rates match those that ended Andrew Luck's career, and then factor in the injuries he's already endured, it's gotta be pretty terrifying for a Bengals fan. Like, Burrow made it just 10 games into his rookie season before it was cut short by a brutal knee injury, which resulted in a torn ACL, PCL, MCL, and meniscus. He played through a dislocated pinky and MCL sprain in their run to the Super Bowl, and then the following year, he went for just 10 games again, suffering a torn wrist ligament. It wasn't much of a surprise that he played at an MVP level when he made it back on the field in 2024. Like, everyone understands and knows Joe Burrow has the talent. The more shocking thing last year, though, was that he stayed healthy for 17 games. And now the question that probably many of you are asking or want to know and answer is, how can the Bengals going forward try to address this situation and spend less money on, skill positions and invest more in the trenches to protect their $250 million quarterback? Well, former Cowboys defensive end Marcus Spears thinks it all comes down to Zach Taylor's scheme.
Rushers are faster, defenses blitz more, people pressure quarterbacks, and they stand in shotgun 90% of the game. And it's no coincidence that your quarterback done missed half of his damn career with your organization because you've refused to do something different to protect him from that aspect. And I don't think enough people are having a conversation about that. We are no longer in the NFL where you're going to stay in your quarterback in shotgun and tell him to throw the ball 45, 50 times a game and expect to have him for the majority of the season. It's not going to happen anymore. Not when you play Myles Garrett twice, not when you play the Baltimore Ravens twice, not when you play the Steelers. That's not going to happen. So this is another interesting situation from an injury standpoint that everybody looks to Joe Burrow and say, oh, okay, now we got to start having an injury-prone conversation. Now we got to start having the direction of the organization and the program. There should have been a conversation about how we play football offensively, starting 2 years ago in Cincinnati.
And look, it's kind of hard to disagree with what he said. It really does feel like all the answers have been right in front of Cincinnati this entire time. Now it's just simply a question of how do they want to resolve this issue. And really, until they can answer that question or solve that question, I should say, they're going to continue squandering all of this offensive talent they have, and they're going to let their Super Bowl window close right in front of them, but right where he left off, and lead this team on a playoff push. Their schedule isn't too tough, but in the event that Jake Browning fails to effectively run this offense, the good news is that there are plenty of veteran options around the league who could step in and do a job for the next 3 or so months. One of the names that does come to mind is Kirk Cousins, currently rotting on the bench in Atlanta, but Big Kirko has been waiting for an opportunity like this to prove that he's still got some winning football in him. However, the problem with trying to pick up a guy like Kirk Cousins is his contract could prove a sticking point even if the Bengals are willing to cough up enough trade capital. Perhaps a more viable and, in my opinion, exciting option is my boy Jameis Winston. Not only is Jameis the ultimate locker room guy, but he probably wouldn't be dismayed about parting ways with the Giants as he sits third on the depth chart. Like, can we all just take a second and picture Jameis Winston's insane arm talent and at times reckless gunslinging playstyle married to this elite group of receivers? It's going to be an exciting prospect for everybody. Like, with the likes of Chase, Higgins, Gesicki, and the new guy, Mitchell Tinsley, they're all liable to make spectacular plays. One thing undoubtedly lies ahead for Cincinnati, though, and it's pure chaos. While it's too late to resolve their deep-rooted issues for 2025, the focus is now getting this team to the best possible position to make the playoffs for the first time since 2022. But arguably missing the postseason for the third time in a row could be a net positive. They'll no longer be able to pave over the cracks in the foundation of their roster, and they'll have to start answering these very deep questions. Otherwise, it's going to get very scary for Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals.